And then review time comes up, Kurt. And guess what I got on my first performance review?
Not good.
I got meet expectations. In my whole life, I have never, ever had to meet expectations on anything I applied myself to. And it drove me crazy.
You know, I love those stories about the new guy coming in and finding problems and helping to raise it up and create awareness. You know, so many people, I think, are burying their head and not afraid to raise it up, right?
I like to say you should be an optimistic contrarian, which is, you know, you got to be really optimistic about the long term and the future and the potential and to see the, you know, the possibilities. But you kind of look around and you just see problems everywhere. My goodness, why is this thing done this way? And most good entrepreneurs are just seeing problems everywhere. Everybody wants Steve Jobs, but the majority of the establishment is investing in Wozniaks. And there's nothing wrong with Wozniak, but he wasn't the CEO for a reason. And so when you've got this establishment all pointed at the same zip codes in Silicon Valley, looking for tech-first entrepreneurs, you end up in a Web3 nightmare where you're investing in a bunch of tech that's looking for problems. And we just don't do that. We look for Steve Jobs, so we look for business-minded people that are committed to customers, that are irrationally obsessive, and they just will not take no for an answer. And in today's day and age, you can build a tech team that can put together a product. You don't need to be a back-end genius to build a great tech company.
Welcome to Unlocking Moves, where we want to cover those key pivotal moments and decision points that really change the lives of successful entrepreneurs and leaders. And I want to hear their stories, because I think we all learn the most from stories. But I don't want to hear just their glory stories. I want to hear their gory stories, because as I like to say, the bigger the shit show, the bigger the lesson. So my guest today is someone who's doing something absolutely creative in the tech venture capital investing world, because he's investing in outsiders, people who don't come from big tech, people that don't come from the Bay Area. Maybe they don't even have a degree from Stanford. Oh my gosh. So this is going to be a great show. We're going to dive into this with Nick Moran. But Nick, before we get going, you might know that I like to hit my guests up with an off-the-wall question or comment to really keep them on their toes, keep my audience on their toes. You ready for this?
I don't think I'll be ready, but give it to me, Kurt.
Okay, well, so you started your career at Danaher, and as quote, where you developed one of the most successful products in the company's history, an analytical device for treating compounds in drinking water, testing compounds in drinking water. According to LinkedIn, you have a business degree from Indiana, which is the Kelley School, which is a great business school. You have an MBA from Virginia, their Darden School. So both great business schools. But I got to tell you, neither one of those scream the ability to test compounds at the nanoscale. What the hell? How did that happen?
Well, I'm not a chemist and I'm not an engineer, to be honest. I am a developer, but you know, you find great tech talent and you discover a problem in the market, and we certainly did. And at the time I was an M&A professional, Kurt. So most of what I did was buy. And in this rare case, no company existed that could do this. And so if you've ever worked in big corporate, you know, there's make or buy decisions. And one of the best decisions of my career was taking agency and ownership and leaning in and saying, we're going to build this thing. And that's what led me to effectively build the Theranos of the water industry. And I say that facetiously because we didn't have the fraud and we got the science to work. But yeah, that's what we built. What Elizabeth Holmes was trying to do with a drop of blood is what Danaher successfully did with a drop of water. And I was super fortunate to be along for that ride with just brilliant chemists and engineers that built an incredible product.
So it sounds like you were able to put together an amazing team, which is what we try to teach our entrepreneurs and CEOs to do all the time. So that's awesome. I love that. I want to dive into that a little bit more. As you can tell, my guest today is Nick Moran. He is the founder of New Stack Ventures, which, as I said before, invests in outsiders. And he's also the longtime host and founder of one of the very first VC podcasts and largest VC podcasts called The Full Ratchet. Nick has a super interesting story that we're absolutely going to dive into. Nick, thank you so much for joining me on Unlocking Moves.
100%. Thanks for having me, Kurt.
Awesome. So, hey, I want to start with your story because, as I said, you're very well degreed from Indiana and also from Virginia with your MBA. But tell me a little bit about your early days, because I don't think you really found your true self until maybe Aon Hewitt or maybe Danaher, maybe even beyond. Tell me a little bit about your early days.
I mean, if I'm being honest, for the first 18 years of my life, I had my head underwater. I was a swimmer, and that's about all I did. So, early in the morning at 4 a.m. and at night from 5 to 8, you could find me in a swim pool. And it wasn't until I got to college that I realized there are three things in college. There's girls, there was school, and there was sports. And I could pick two. And ultimately, I did not pick sports. So I swam for a while, and then I quit the team and joined the water polo team, which was about 2 hours of practice a day, much easier. And I had a great time at Indiana. So my big dream of like making the Olympics and doing all that didn't really pan out. But I found something that was much more in line with my passions, right? I think it's kind of a crisis of young people that were often forced into things that we're really good at, but maybe it's not what we really love. I have a brother who was an attorney for many years, and if I had to hire anyone in the country to be my counsel, I would hire my brother, but he didn't like it. He hated it. And so now he's a venture capitalist. He's the COO for Newstack. And so, fortunately, I discovered my path in business as a freshman in college, and I've never looked back.
Well, hey, I love what you said. A couple things. First of all, let me comment on swimming. I always was inspired by the swimmers who got up at 4 a.m. every day. It is not me, so I never could swim because I can't get up that freaking early. But the other thing you said was about, you didn't say it this way, but finding your purpose, aligning your passion and your skills and being able to do something with it, with an economic engine so you can make a living out of it. That's amazing. So I might want to dive into that part of your story as well. In fact, let's go there. Tell me a little bit about that, because a lot of people are good at things and maybe their parents pushed them into law degree or maybe pushed them into swimming. And you realized early on, I think I realized that at 45 years old. You learned it at 18, 19 years old. Tell me about that.
Well, I mean, the good news is I was on the business path, but as you know, Kurt, there's a million branches from there, right? And often we get to college and we're expected to select our major and kind of know what we want to do. And you go through the recruiting cycle. And the truth is, a lot of young people that are 18, 19, 20, they don't know what they want to do for the rest of their lives. And I didn't discover my true calling until about 32. So I think a lot of people are pressured. You can get stereotyped. You can get typecast into a certain field. Oh, you're a marketer. Oh, you're a finance, guy. But I was very fortunate that I did find my path, over the course of a number of years. And I got paid really good money to work my ass off and learn excellent skills when I was young from some of the best to have done it. I mean, Danaher, I think, has been the second best performing stock behind Apple over the past 3 decades. That place was an absolute machine. And I learned incredible PE playbooks around how to do M&A. I had this crazy experience building the water product that, I like in the Theranos. And these are some of the hardest experiences I've been through, but also the most formative. And often, the challenging stuff is where you really learn. And that really set me on this VC path.
That's a great thing I'd like to unpack. We are in college graduate season coming up here in a couple of months. So every day it seems like I'm being hit up by somebody whose kid is graduating. Can I connect them with somebody or help them find a job? You touched on a couple of things there. First of all, I want to dive into the couple of jobs you had, it looks like postgraduate, that ultimately ended up with you going to Aon Hewitt. But before that, let's talk about those formative years at Danaher. They were very, very challenging for you. It sounds like you worked your ass off. You weren't doing it just for a paycheck. It sounds like you were paid well, but you also used it to be the foundation for what became the rest of your career. Let's talk about that, because I think that's some guidance I would give to any college graduate is whatever you do, make it foundational and learn from it. Learn what to do or maybe even what not to do.
Well, there's a million lessons. It's hard to focus on one. I think the first major lesson I learned in my career is not to be an order taker, to be a value driver. And that was a hard lesson. You show up to work and you don't know what the heck you're doing. And people are saying, I need X or Y. And you think you're doing a good job delivering exactly what they've asked for and putting in the hours. And then review time comes up, Kurt. And guess what I got on my first performance review?
Not good.
I got meet expectations, right? In my whole life, I have never, ever had to meet expectations on anything I applied myself to. And it drove me crazy. And so it was at that time that I said, I'm going 7 days a week. I will be the first one in the office. I'm not leaving the office before 10 p.m. And I'm going to spend as many years as it takes to be the biggest value driver in this organization, to where they're giving me everything they possibly can because they know that I'm the one that can perform. And it was, I really leaned into it. And that's where I got fast cycles. If you put in more time and you do more learning, everything speeds up and you become the go-to resource for every difficult problem that your leadership is facing. And when you get those difficult problems, you just learn at a rapid pace. So it was a formative experience. It was very hard, but I relished that time because it really taught me what to look for in entrepreneurs when I'm investing in a startup.
I'm sure there's a therapist out there cringing that you got your satisfaction from pleasing other people or proving other people wrong. But I can see where that could be a driver. You really want to prove other people wrong, that you are the go-to guy. You're not just a average meet expectation guy. You're a kick-ass guy.
100%. Nobody wants to hear that feedback. Of course, you don't want to hear that you're not meeting expectations. Then you really got to take a step back and assess. But just being average, just meeting expectations is never the bar that I hold myself to. The same thing with our firm, right? We've launched New Stack, and the minimum bar is a 10x fund, right? And that's no longer the case in venture, right? The majority of venture firms underperform the S&P 500. The majority of venture firms make most of their money on fees, so they're asset gatherers. Nobody targets these 10x funds anymore. And if you don't have a high bar for what you're doing, you can't structure a strategy to achieve greatness. And so I think it all begins with kind of what you hold yourself to, and everything else follows.
Well, we're skipping around a little bit, but this is okay. I wanted to dive into this topic. I'll come back to your formative years. Let's talk about what you look for in an entrepreneur. Because based on what you just said about yourself and your own expectations for what you bring to the table, you've got a high bar for the entrepreneurs that you invest in. Because you're not just investing in an idea, you're not just investing in a market, you're investing in a person or people, a team, to accomplish what they think and you think they can accomplish.
If you're just joining us on Unlocking Moves, today's episode is brought to you as usual by HireBetter, the strategic talent partner for growth-minded entrepreneurs everywhere.
Well, I think any VC is going to tell you they want to invest in remarkable founders in massive markets, right? This is actually a very simple business. It's not complicated. It's just hard to execute well. We all are rowing in the same direction. We all know we want to invest in just extraordinary people in huge spaces. But we define that differently and we measure it differently. And so one of the things that I think we do that's pretty unique, I interview folks on TFR. I've probably done over 500 interviews over 11 years, and I don't hear VCs talking about evaluating people the way that we talk about people, with a few notable exceptions, all of which are on the Midas list. There's 3 people that kind of talk the same way we do. But we're monitoring key characteristics and we're observing behavior. If I had asked you, Kurt, if you were hiring somebody for an organization, when you go through the interview process and you make that offer, do you know if that person is going to be tremendously successful for you or not?
You never know.
You never know. Now, if I ask you 3 months in, 2 months in, do you have a sense if they have what it takes to be successful at 2 or 3 months?
You have a pretty good idea at that point.
You got a better idea, right? So we've kind of reframed our diligence process. If you think of it broadly speaking as interviews and internships, we run our diligence process as like an internship. We are working alongside the founder. We both have a common goal, And that's to figure out if there's a partnership here, figure out if we can get to a deal. We're working a problem together. Oh, we need a market sizing. How would you think about this? How would you think about your roadmap? And when you work alongside that founder for 2 months, working a problem together, all you have to do is open your eyes and ears and observe their behaviors. How do they work with their team? How do they respond to challenges? How do they answer questions? How do they deliver on follow-ups, right? Do they set timelines and meet those timelines, right? Or do they miss them? Do they show decisiveness, right? There's going to be a lot of noise. There's going to be a lot of there's going to be unknowns in every decision, but as an entrepreneur, you got to make many decisions every day. And so these things are very observable, and we've developed a whole sort of platform where we observe certain behaviors and we look at it. Internship is a funny word, but we look at it as a project that we're working on with the entrepreneur instead of what most VCs do, which is a Q&A, then a reference check, then a check. We don't invest in resumes. We invest in behavior.
I love that. Just for the listeners to know, TFR stands for The Full Ratchet, which is the podcast that Nick runs. I like that. I like the 90-day assessment, basically. You're going to work alongside them many ways anyway, but you have a goal and an agenda for that. And it sounds like you're also true to form when you decide whether or not to invest after that period. My take is a bunch of private equity and venture capitalists, they've already sunk 90 days into it. They're going to do the deal in many cases. Obviously, 100%. You guys have a tougher bar.
Well, I mean, these behaviors tend to reveal themselves in real time. So there are many, many opportunities for us to back off, save the entrepreneur's time, and say, look, we're not the right fit because we've got a style and a way of doing things, and it's a partnership. And if we have a similar style and a similar rhythm with founders, if they are as obsessive and as committed and as highly attention to detail as we are, it's going to be an awesome partnership. And if they're not, it doesn't mean they're not going to build a great business. Many will, but they're going to be better partners with somebody else who has a completely different rhythm and completely different style to us.
And I appreciate that. Sometimes just getting to the answer of no is way more important than getting to a yes. And you found a way to filter out the folks who aren't the good fits. So let me come back to, we talked about this being graduation season and folks landing their first job. As I said before, I have a lot of conversations with either recent or about to be college grads. And it's all about, finding their first job. And some of my counsel is try to find something foundational, especially if they're coming from a Kelley School of Business or something. Let's try to find something that can builds on that versus, takes a step back. Now, in my case, I ended up at Ernst & Young, but it took me a job or two to get there. So I usually just talk about my Ernst & Young foundation. In your case, it looks like you have a couple of deals before you went to Aon Hewitt. So can you talk a little about those less than a year stops on your LinkedIn resume? And maybe relate that to how it relates to the job search process for newly minted grads.
Oh boy, big question. So my first internship was doing biomedical statistics for a company that used vitamins to treat disorders. So this is before vitamins were big and, lots of drugs to treat disorders. I kind of lucked into that, and it sounds fancier than it was, but I was basically just running regressions in Excel to try and find commonalities and key things that worked. And it was a good experience. It was a learning experience. It was my first desk job. My second job, I was doing logistics for a company called Nalco, which happens to be a water treatment company. And funny enough, 2 weeks ago, I was in Scottsdale having dinner with the former CEO of Nalco, who's now retired, but he's an LP of ours. And it's just an amazing full circle story because I interned there and I was a nobody, right? I was processing bills of lading, just like over and over again. But I discovered something when I was processing these bills. It's kind of a funny story, a little bit of an unlock here, Kurt. But I'm processing these bills and we would send out chemicals in something that looked like a beer keg. You can estimate the size of it. It was steel. And when these beer kegs were shipped back to us, we were getting charged double the amount as when we shipped them out. So when they were full of chemical on the way out, we were getting a much cheaper price than on the way back. And that's because way back then, LTL shipping was based on volume and weight. And if you had something that was light, it actually cost you more. It was kind of a glitch in the way that things were priced. And the only one that like came across it was the guy that was doing data entry, which was me. And so I kind of raised my hand about it, and we were able to get all our contracts fixed and for the price to be lowered down to, at the most, the price of when it's full, because obviously when you're shipping mass, it costs more money, it costs more fuel. But yeah, it was really nice when I was in Scottsdale a couple weeks ago to kind of meet with him, and I told him that story. Those things are called porta feeds. And he immediately said, "Are you talking about porta feeds? Wow, that's amazing." And so I don't think it reached his desk, but it was kind of funny.
Nice. I love those stories about the new guy coming in and finding problems and helping to raise it up and create awareness. So many people I think are burying their head and not afraid to raise it up, right? And so you took the chance to do that.
Well, I mean, any entrepreneur, you should probably, I like to say you should be an optimistic contrarian, which is, you got to be really optimistic about the long term and the future and the potential, and to see the possibilities. But you kind of look around and you just see problems everywhere, right? You're a like, my goodness, why is this thing done this way, right? Whether it's, a doorknob or a garage door opener, or like, the windshield wipers in a vehicle. Like there's a lot of things that are designed in a non-intuitive way that could, use some improvement. And most good entrepreneurs are just seeing problems everywhere.
That resonates. My first job out of college was working with the RTC, which was back in the Resolution Trust Corporation when the savings and loan crisis happened. And I came in as a newbie trying to prove myself and try to find things and do things the right way. And why are we doing things this way? And some of the old guards that worked with the federal government, they're like, "Whoa there, cowboy, let's slow the pace a little bit. I got a smoke break I got to go to." So yeah, I appreciate that.
That's so funny. Yeah, it's tough. Sometimes it's tough working in big corporate, right? Because there's a lot of people are there because they like things to kind of remain the same, if we're being honest. Right. And the people that are really stifled, the people that are like very creative and ambitious and kind of want to disrupt everything, usually they move out of the organization or they move up quick. So yeah, it's the tough thing about corporate America. It's a great place to learn, but it can be pretty stifling for the entrepreneur.
Absolutely. I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. So, hey, so you founded New Stack Ventures. Tell me about how that came about. You left Danaher. It sounds like you might've been doing some things on your own for a little bit. Tell me why or how you ended up starting your own deal.
Well, I mean, I've got a lot of gratitude for Danaher because they taught me a playbook on mid-market PE investing. When I had this ride doing this testing product, I knew like I needed to be an entrepreneur in some way. And my toolkit was investing. So I wanted to do venture. And I moved back to Chicago specifically to do that. But pretty quick, I realized, two important legs of the stool in venture are your network and your deal flow, and both of mine were terrible. Like I had terrible deal flow. I didn't have any pipelines, and I didn't know, a bunch of entrepreneurs. I didn't know a bunch of venture capitalists. I didn't know the service providers and the lawyers and the bankers. And so, I started incrementally getting after that. How do I build a network and build deal flow? And ultimately, that's where I came up with this crazy idea. Ooh, maybe I can get some scale out of starting the first VC podcast. Nobody's doing VC yet. There's other topics that are being done, but at the time, no one was doing VC. And I think 3 months after we launched, Andreessen launched a podcast. 8 months later, a guy named Harry Stebbings launched one. And, now it seems like every venture firm has a podcast now. So it's a little noisy. But for a long time there was nobody. So we went from 6 listeners in week 1 to 60 in week 2, and 60 became 600, then 6,000, then 60,000, and then well over 100. So it was just, I was very lucky, I think, with timing to be early to it. And I'm really glad I stuck with it in those, early months when it was just a trickle of listeners.
It's hard to do it every week or every couple of weeks. It takes some grit, even in that, right? And you don't, at least my strategy has been, let's put some great stuff out and be proud of it and have some great conversations, and some of the rest will take care of itself. Sounds like you had some of that same strategy.
100%. Anything worth doing is going to be an effort. It's
Yeah.
going to require a lot. And some people get lucky, but you gotta be careful not to get caught up in, oh, there's an easy button out there and there's a quick path to getting rich. And if you want to do something meaningful, you really got to put in the work.
I like that. And frankly, put yourself out there, because it can be humbling when people are like, what the hell? So you're putting yourself out there. So congrats to you for doing that in the early days, especially. Now, like you said, you can't sling a dead cat without hitting somebody who's got a podcast. As
I used to be
evidenced by this
petrified.
podcast.
I used to be petrified of speaking in public, honestly. Like in high school, I couldn't do it. I was like shaking in front of the room. So this was one of those areas, like everyone says, lean into your strengths. And I couldn't disagree with that more. If you want to be a leader, you've got to address your weaknesses and you got to get yourself well-rounded. So I think that's bad advice. And something that I was mortally afraid of was putting myself in public, doing something. Like if you listen to the early episodes, you will hear the quiver in my voice. I am, shaking like a tree in, a windstorm. But it caused me to get comfortable, and it helped teach me how do you sell to LPs and raise money. And so it's been a great sort of way to kind of help me develop as a professional.
I like that. And let me address what you said earlier about leaning into your strength versus your weaknesses. I am one of those lean into your strengths guys. So I believe that you can really develop your strengths and just be really good at what you're great at and what you enjoy doing. So back to our previous conversation. But you also bring up a great point, which I do agree with too, that there are certain leadership attributes that you need to be good at. And when I was my first entrepreneur role, I ended up with about 120 professionals that worked for me. And as I'm giving quarterly updates or whatever, I was petrified of public speaking, and I didn't like it. But my advice to myself was, if I'm not going to do it, who's going to do it? And if it's somebody else, who's the real leader of this organization? So I sucked it up and got pretty good at it and asked for feedback and all the stuff. So I'll say I agree with you, but I also agree with leaning into your strengths or being great at what you're good at.
Well, now you're a pro. So
there you go. Perfect.
I do agree with the premise that like once you kind of learn something, once you got a handle on it, find somebody that's better than you at it. But like, for instance, I wasn't an attention to detail guy when I was younger. I was a big picture guy. But when I was doing diligence on deals for Danaher, you're sure as shit I was, 500 lines deep in the spreadsheet, scrutinizing every little detail. And that was painstaking, but it taught me, how do you diligence a deal the right way and make sure that you're not, doing something and there's red flags out there that you're missing because you're lazy or because you think you're not good with details. And so, now that I'm running my own venture firm, am I doing all that diligence? No, but I kind of had to master the skill first so that I could help teach other people and then find people that are even better at it than I am.
I like that. Find people better at it than you are. That's great. So, hey, let's talk a little bit about the firm. So you invest in outsiders. As I said, we talked a little bit about that. I'm sure there's more to that story. You also have a special thesis. You have a great track record so far, and then you've got some differentiation. So tell me a little bit about what you guys are doing and how can I help?
Well, send us your best deals, right? You're in Texas and there's a lot of good startups there. So send those to us. Yeah, our tagline is investing in outsiders, which is to say we're not investing in your Twitter bro in Palo Alto that went to Stanford, right? That's not what we do. We're looking for killers, off the beaten path in Dallas, Austin, Salt Lake City, Phoenix, Chicago, that have real earned insights, right? We talked about you're walking around, you're seeing problems everywhere. There's a lot of entrepreneurs hiding out in different industries, seeing problems, big problems that want to solve them. And the industry's changed, right? Like 15 years ago, you had to be a developer to build a great business. 95% of them, were developers. And you don't need to anymore. And so what's happened is the majority of the venture capitalists today were technologists. And guess who people like to invest in? They like to invest in people like themselves, right? It's human nature, right? You resonate with people that are like you. You talk the same language. You want to get in the details of the stack and Node.js and React and whatever, right? But when you've got this patriarchy of technologists that are VCs, they're still investing in the same thing they always have, which is, I talk about this tale of two Steves, right? You got Steve Jobs at Apple and you got Steve Wozniak at Apple. Everybody wants Steve Jobs, but the majority of the establishment is investing in Wozniaks. And there's nothing wrong with Wozniak, but he wasn't the CEO for a reason. And so when you've got this establishment all pointed at the same zip codes in Silicon Valley, looking for tech-first entrepreneurs, you end up in a Web3 nightmare where you're investing in a bunch of tech that's looking for problems. And we just don't do that. We look for Steve Jobs, so we look for business-minded people that are committed to customers, that are irrationally obsessive, and they just will not take no for an answer. And in today's day and age, you can build a tech team that can put together a product. You don't need to be a back-end genius to build a great tech company.
Dude, I love the passion in your voice that you just displayed. And that tells me that that's exactly probably the same type of passion you're looking for from your entrepreneurs. Your eyes lit up, your voice got up. I mean, you were passionate about that, baby. I love that.
Well, I mean, shoot, you do this too, Kurt, but when you find these people, it is magic. I just met with one. One flew into Salt Lake City. That's, we pushed this back a little bit because I just dropped off at the airport. I made an offer and I drove back here. And then I got a call from Luke and Ari on my team. They're in Boston today and they made an offer to a startup there and it was very well received. And I just think about the years ahead where I get to work with these people, right? They say there's no called strikes in venture, which means you don't have to swing at anything you don't want to swing at. If you meet a founder or you meet a business and it's not a fit for you, don't swing, right? But we got to swing on two today, and I felt like we connected, and these are people I can't wait to spend real time with and watch them build and be along for that ride.
Let's go. Let's go. Hey, the other thing I found interesting, and I think it was your website, says something along the lines of you have obtained good valuations before they become consensus, which I thought was a fascinating term. So I think that aligns with what you were saying about the other tech firm, other venture capitalists, and how are they the consensus?
Well, I think yes. I think consensus can take two forms. One form is central casting, right? You got your Stanford founder that worked at Google that's in Palo Alto, and boom, we're going to invest $10 million on a resume because that is the right profile. The other consensus is traction. Right? You can't argue with success, and somebody whips out 2 million, 4 million of ARR, and all of a sudden every VC in Silicon Valley sits up in their seats and says, Nick, send me that deal, right? What's not consensus is investing in the founder that doesn't have that resume and or the founder that doesn't have the traction. So about 70% of our deals are pre-revenue deals. And our top 5 performing deals were all pre-revenue at the time we invested. So when there is no traction, we are forced to evaluate the fundamentals, which is mostly the people and the market opportunity. When there is traction, sometimes you can get distracted by it, right? You forget about the fleet. Wow, this must be working because they have this revenue, right? They must be great, right? That's second principles. First principles is no. Evaluate if they're truly great, and all the traction will follow. So we try and invest non-consensus. We try and find arbitrage. Shoot, I am an investor. Investing in its core is an arbitrage game, right? You cannot be investing in things at full price or overpriced. And when everyone in Silicon Valley is chasing the same assets, those things are often overpriced. Everyone's competing to get in. You can't do a real diligence process when you're chasing something, right? You're begging the entrepreneur to let you in for, hey, I want to get $1 million. Are you really putting that through its pressure test? Are you really evaluating every element of that deal? Heck no. And so I have this debate with my friends in the Valley all the time. It's a fun debate because, they got good firms. But I'm like, man, you are not doing diligence on something you're chasing when you're begging these entrepreneurs to let you in. It's just not happening.
Man, that is great. I love that. So let's shift gears a little bit, because you made a comment to me recently that says something along the lines of that you love ugly, problematic startups that have a lot of issues. Tell me what that means. That means you're investing in those guys, or you're saving those folks?
I love them because, I'll give you an example, right? You meet a startup and the startup's having some success, right? Customers are excited and things are, starting to happen, and you're seeing some of that traction start to materialize. And you go to the website and the website looks like it's from 1990, right? Or you look at like their onboarding flow and it's super broken, right? Or you get a demo of the first product and it's like, wow, this looks like a feature. This doesn't even look like a product. This is, something that somebody, built in the basement in one night. It doesn't look like a full functioning product. The reason I like those is because often it's an early business and you don't need to over design things. You don't need to make them beautiful. You don't need to invest 2 years in building an MVP. And number two, if customers are thrilled and there's some traction, that means they are successful in spite of the fact that this thing is super ugly, right? It's like not very pretty. And so when you start to clean up the onboarding, you start to clean up the enrollment, the website, like, oh, there's a form you can fill out, to process leads, qualified leads. Like there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that can be improved. But the one thing you can't replace on any startup is have they found the zeitgeist? Is there a real problem that has so much pain that there's clear market pull? And so I love, a great problem with real market pull, and a lot of the window dressing doesn't look good because once you fix that, like things start to take off.
I like the easy fixes that can really enhance it substantially. So making it more efficient, making it prettier, making it whatever, that really hits home. So, hey, let's shift gears again. So your podcast is very popular, as you said. It's called The Full Ratchet. Now, the term The Full Ratchet is not a very founder-friendly term. So tell me a little bit about the name The Full Ratchet.
Well, when we started the podcast, the goal was how do we demystify venture capital? Because VC had a kind of a bad reputation. I started the podcast back in 2013, I think. So, in the aughts, like VC had a bad reputation. The standard playbook for VCs was you replace the founder of Series A, you hire a professional team. That was like very common, and some VCs still do that, right? And so the goal of the show was let's take this thing behind the curtain that nobody knows about, like lick prefs and participating preferred and pro ratas, preemptive rights, MFN, safe notes, convertibles, price rounds. Like a lot of these things, people were just super opaque. People didn't know what the heck was going on in the industry. And so the VCs had a significant advantage over the entrepreneurs. And lawyers often weren't very helpful because most entrepreneurs don't select like the most sophisticated venture attorney for their first round of capital. They select the one they know. And so the whole goal of the show was how do we pull back the curtain on things like the full ratchet? How do we demystify all these thorny things in the industry? And so that entrepreneurs have a real chance. And let's bring that knowledge base up so we're all on the same playing field and we can negotiate in good faith instead of one side having a severe advantage over the other.
All right. I like it. So you used the term to showcase some of the confusion in the market and you educated the market. Perfect.
It's kind of a catchy name. And it's also like, what is this? So you kind of have to figure it out. Right. And so that's what the whole show is. Let's figure all these things out.
So, hey, we're at the point of the show where I want to try to uncover your unlocking move or moves.
Okay.
Again, which is a key pivotal moment or decision point. I firmly believe that everybody has some point or points where they can make an upward trajectory, but a lot of times we don't take that opportunity. So I want to inspire others to see how they could do it based on the stories of folks like you.
Oh boy, I feel like we talked about a couple of them, kind of shifting my mindset, having that discovery, when I got the meat expectations, having that discovery that I needed to shift from an order taker to a value driver was a huge unlock of value for me. Getting into the venture industry and realizing I needed to 10x or 100x my network power. I need to be the best networked VC guy in Chicago and maybe in the country. When you think that big, it forces you into big choices, which led me to start a podcast. It seems like a funny thing, but it ended up, I know 90% of the founding partners at the tier ones. Now it's taken me 11 years to build that up, but when outsider startups from Nashville or Dallas pitch us, I say, why are you pitching Newstack? It's like, well, more founding partners than anybody in the country, and I want access to those at Series A. I don't want to get in with the analyst. I want you to email Frank Rotman or Alan Patrikoff or Tim Draper or Doug Leone. I want to go straight in at the top. And so it's, that's been transformational too. So ultimately, a lot of these moves come down to mindset. And sometimes we have to learn lessons the hard way, as I have. But shifting your mindset to kind of think bigger, drive value, make people's lives easier, that's when value accrues to you. If you're me focused, like, how do I get the promotion? How do I, level up? How do I make more money? It's the wrong mindset. Think about driving value for others, right? Like, you're producing a podcast. This takes a lot of work for you, but I'm sure you have a ton of listeners that have had unlocks, right? They've had epiphanies and they've changed their lives or their careers because of the work you put in, and it will come back to you. It probably already has. You probably get opportunities and value because you've helped other people, and I certainly have too.
Well, the universe definitely has a way to pay it forward for those who are doing things. I live in a world of abundance. So, but let me come back to a couple of things you said, because at least twice, maybe three times, we've talked about this idea of turning a negative into a positive. So earlier we talked about public speaking and how your podcast has made you now into a great speaker. You also talked about your network being a hindrance to your capabilities of being a strong VC in Chicago, to not all of a sudden, over 11 years, it's become an asset. So I think for me, that's inspiring, that you can take something that's a perceived negative and turn it and make it into an asset. But I want to encourage people, it took 11 years. So none of these are, fly by night is going to flip a switch. I like to, say, the 11-year overnight success story or whatever. It does take work to make it happen.
100%. I mean, the podcast alone, there are a lot of copycats along the way, and there are very few people standing still that started back then, so you said it right before. It's not just the idea, it's kind of the grit and the follow through and determination.
Hey, I want to ask you a question now. I call it the listener's advocate question. If I've got Nick Moran in a one-on-one situation, what kind of question would I want Kurt to ask? Because I'm thinking the same thing, right? So I want to tell me a little bit about some of those key things you're looking for in an investable founder. So we talked about grit, we talked about some of those things, but I know you have a unique strategy for uncovering those things. What are you willing to share about the types of things that Nick and New Stack Ventures look for in your investable founders?
Yeah, I think you start with the most successful founders in history. That's where you start. Just like when you're investing, you should start with the best of the best VCs, right? The Midas list investors. And when you study founders very closely, and I'm thinking like Rockefeller, Edison, Sam Walton, of course, Steve Jobs, Estee Lauder. When you study some of these great founders closely, these are all different people, but what you find quickly is they have way more in common than they do different. So history's best founders are actually quite similar. They have differences, but the mindset has a lot of similar characteristics. And so what we did is we kind of boiled down, what are the characteristics we're looking for? What characteristics lend themselves to tremendous, remarkable builders? And we aligned on 6 characteristics. I'm happy to run through those if you'd like.
I would love it.
Yeah. So
if you're willing to share, I know this is also IP that is very protected by New Stack Ventures.
No, I mean, we have a whole framework around it. And of course, LPs love digging in on this stuff. It's kind of like a fun talking point. But
as a prospective LP, I need to hear this story anyway.
Tenacity, resourcefulness, magnetism, obsession, attention to detail, and learning appetite. And even that last one, we say appetite, not agility, because some people can learn really quick, but it's the desire to learn and learn more that we've found is the consistent thread between history's greatest entrepreneurs. So you start with the characteristics and you keep walking down the path. So what are the behaviors that you see in the most tenacious founders? Right? We very specifically laid out, here are the behaviors that you can expect to observe. And once I codify, you can observe these things anecdotally. Kurt, you probably have a lot of pattern recognition because I know you do a lot of investing. And in your head, you kind of know when you meet with an entrepreneur if they have the it factor or not. But as I started building a team, I'm an athlete, I'm a coach. I used to coach swimming. I'm a team guy. I couldn't do this by myself. I just love having a team and working problems together. But I quickly realized a lot of the entrepreneurs that my team would send me were way off of my mark. And so then I started codifying these specific things. Here are all the behaviors associated with tenacity that I look for, specific behaviors. And if you don't see them, pass. And now when my team sends me entrepreneurs, they're like super close to the pin, if not in the hole. And so like we've gotten alignment really quickly by taking this pattern recognition that VCs talk about. And a lot of VCs guard closely because they want to stay in their ivory tower. And I'm just kind of an open source book. I'm like, look, I'm going to teach you everything I know, and you're going to be a dangerous investor. You know, I have stories about that, but if you stick with me for a few years, like there's going to be a lot of firms that want to hire you because you're going to have some massive winners in the portfolio. But you know, try and embed these principles and then add your own. Like we've got some people with some incredible insights on the team, and they've really been additive to our entire process.
Nice. Can you go through those 6 one more time for me?
Yes, it's tenacity, resourcefulness, magnetism, obsession, attention to detail, and learning appetite.
I love it. I love it. Thank you for sharing. Okay. So I've got one more question for you. It's a bit of a trick question. And that is, what is one question that you're never asked and either you wish they would ask or you're secretly glad that they don't?
Ooh, probably where do you get your drive?
All right, let's go. Where do you get your drive? Well, besides the story of the first review you got out of college.
You know what?
You were a swimmer
Kurt,
before
like,
that, so you had your drive ingrained in you some form.
I work with my older brother now, and it's great. But when I was growing up, he was bigger, stronger, better athlete, better at school, golden child, right? I mean, this guy was elite at just about everything he did. And that's a hard act to follow. You know, when you're like not as fast, not as smart, not as savvy, you know, I mean, my brother's a dialed guy and I wasn't, you know, I was a late bloomer and I really learned things deeply and it takes me a while, and dyslexic, I'm a slow reader, and you know, there's a lot of these things, and I got a chip. You know, I got a chip on my shoulder, and I've never been able to shake that chip, and I'm pretty glad I haven't because it's who I am. You know, I just have this insatiable desire to outperform, to prove people wrong, to overcome odds, and it's the exact same entrepreneur that we invest in, right? The people that are getting no attention from the valley that should deserve all the attention because they've got it. And it's really hard to put your finger on that, but they're out there, and when we find them, it's an incredible ride. And so that's who I am at this point, and I'm proud to be that way.
I love it. Hey man, thank you for sharing. That is a very, again, passionate and inspirational. And I'll tell you this, I don't see how anybody could overlook you anymore. You are a badass. I've been impressed from the moment I met you. So there you go.
Thank you, sir. It's kind of you to say.
Hey, Nick, on that note, we're going to wrap this puppy up. Thank you so much for joining me on Unlocking Moves. And for all the audience out there, I encourage you to please go like and subscribe wherever you consume your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, whatever. Go check us out on Unlocking Moves. Nick Moran, you're the man. Thank you so much.
Kurt, you're the best. You're a pro. I would never have guessed that you were nervous public speaking because, you know, you got this down. But thanks so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
If you're an entrepreneur and you think you might have outgrown a member of your team, or maybe you've got a mic, as we talked about in Who's Your Mic, check out this quiz at who'syourmic.com/quiz. That's who'syourmic.com/quiz.